HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Myth of Surrender, a novel, by Kelly O'Connor Mcnees, read by Carlotta Brentan. We are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who find our way back to this scene, carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths, in which our names do not appear. Diving into the Wreck by Adrienne Rich. Part 1. Conception. Summer and Fall 1960. 1. Doreen. Moselle sent Doreen letters through the mail. That was what made him different. That was how it all began. She made sure to get home in time to intercept them from the mailbox in the entryway of her family's two-flat before her mother's nursing shift ended. Not that Carla would have noticed or thought much about the plain white envelopes with the initials MP neatly written in the upper left-hand corner. MP could have been one of Doreen's friends from high school, now scattered to the winds of beauty college, typing pools, and the self-satisfied early days of marriage. If Carla had found a letter, and paid very close attention, the address on South Cottage Grove might have given her pause. But she was distracted. A widow now, she had the building to manage on her own, tenants to hound about the rent, and don't think she didn't. What did Carla care if Doreen had a little pen pal? Doreen first met Moselle when she was hanging around with a fast girl named Wanda, who was a year older, and had a Brigitte Bardot beehive and perfect cat's eyes drawn in with kohl. Wanda's parents had money and believed every lie she told them. She did whatever the hell she wanted, which made her a mercurial but thrilling friend. One night, Wanda convinced Doreen to sneak out. Sneak, because although Doreen was 18 now, Carla continued to impose Vincenzo's curfew, even though he was dead. Doreen could have made a stink, but she had other battles to wage with her downtrodden mother. So she claimed she was going to bed early, and then climbed out the second-story window, scuttling across the overhang above the back door in her slip, with her dress tied around her neck to keep it clean. In the alley, she slid it on, clipped on earrings, and applied her Revlon cherries in the snow by feel. Wanda was waiting on the corner, and they hailed a taxi to the Regal Theater on South Parkway. Only 6 miles away, but it might as well have been on the moon. There were maybe 5 white girls in the sea of the audience, and Doreen had a brief cardiac episode when she thought about what would happen if her brother, Danny, found out she'd come here. His face would turn red, his greased hair would spark, his whole head would explode like a Roman candle. But Wanda had suggested the Regal for a reason. She knew that Doreen's own personal version of heaven was 4 girls on stage in matching redshift dresses and black elbow-length gloves and eyelashes as long as feathers, singing a song about dancing with a boy. When the curtain parted for the opening act, a small-time local group called the Sweet Dreams began to coo, and Danny and all his prejudiced crap ceased to exist. Doreen was transfixed. All the hottest acts came to the Regal, the Coasters, Ray Charles, Bo Diddley, but it had only been in the past few months that these girl groups, like the Bobettes and the Chantels, had started coming through Chicago. Their posters, taped to the windows at Soundtown Records, got Doreen's attention, and the store's owner, Lou, a nice guy with maybe a bit of a crush on her, told Doreen to give them a listen. Those records opened a door. All her life, she'd had a hunch she would be famous someday. And now she knew how she would do it. She would get discovered by an A&R man, and he would put her in one of these groups. Doreen was only a middling singer, but she was convinced she could write hit songs. And Lou encouraged her, looking over her lyrics, letting her play the piano in the store. Doreen didn't have her heart set on being the lead. It wasn't about that. As likely the tallest one, she'd probably have to stand in back anyway. She just wanted to be there among them while they all sang a melody she had written, owning the stage without a man in sight, and getting her songs on the radio. Wanda and Doreen found themselves seated next to two young men about their age, and the one next to Wanda struck up a conversation with her about how there wasn't a bad seat in this house because of the way it had been designed back in the 1920s by some architect with a German name he said was a genius. Doreen was annoyed by their talking over the music, but when she glanced over to nod along politely, she noticed the guy's friend. He had narrow shoulders and wore an olive-colored jacket that was too big for him, an orange pocket square, glasses with black frames. He noticed Doreen back, smiled, and revealed the small gap between his two front teeth that made her a little dizzy. The talkative companion was his brother, it turned out, and the brother was making enough headway with Wanda to have convinced her to step out of the theater to get some air. As the two of them shimmied into the aisle, the guy in the glasses stretched his hand across the two empty chairs. "Moselle Palmer," he said, his fingers sliding against hers. "Doreen," she whispered. A new number was starting on stage, so they did not talk. The Sweet Dreams choreography was a little obvious, Doreen thought, but you couldn't argue with that 4-part harmony. It made her toes curl. When the intermission came, Wanda and the brother were still nowhere to be found, and Moselle just sat quietly, now and then adjusting his glasses with his left hand. He was shy, she saw at once, almost painfully so. Doreen felt for him. Just to fill the space, she started talking about her favorite topic, the Shirelles. "Shirley Owens got them together at a high school talent show in New Jersey. Can you believe that? I read about it in a magazine." Moselle shook his head. He couldn't believe it. He had his left leg crossed over his right, his long fingers folded elegantly in his lap. Doreen remembered how carelessly she had applied her lipstick in the alley and hoped it looked okay now that the house lights were up. Her hair was shellacked in place with Aquanet, and there was no need to smooth it. Still, she smoothed it. "Well, it's true," she said. "Do you know they started out with a different name?" "I didn't know that, no." "You'll never guess what it was." Moselle was patient, his attention squarely in this moment and nowhere else. "You're probably right about that." "The Honeytunes. Isn't that a scream? I just love it. Do you know their song, 'Tonight's the Night'?" "Sure," Moselle said, nodding. "A lot of people don't know Shirley Owens wrote that one. Well, she co-wrote it. Most of these girl groups sing songs other people write for them, but she's writing for the group herself." "That's great," Moselle said uncertainly. "You're not one of those guys who think women can't write songs, are you?" "I honestly haven't." "Because when I'm up there someday, you won't see me singing anything I haven't written myself. What would be the point of singing a song that doesn't come from your own life?" "I'm not," Moselle said. "Not what?" "Not one of those guys." He looked amused, maybe a little intimidated. "Who think girls can't write songs." "Oh," Doreen said. "Well, good." She flushed. Carla always told her she got too excited about things, bulldozed the conversation. Doreen realized she hadn't asked Moselle anything about himself, and was trying to think of something when the lights went down for the headliners show. At the end of the night, Moselle asked not for her phone number, they both knew why that was not a good idea, but her address. When he could see Doreen imagining Danny opening the door to find Moselle standing on the stoop, he clarified his intention. "I've got something to send you." The first letter came a week later. "Dear Doreen, it was a pleasure talking with you at the concert last week. I appreciated that you were willing to share your knowledge about the music industry. Hope you are having an enjoyable summer. Your friend, Moselle Palmer." Doreen read through it twice, flipped it over to see whether anything else was written on the back of the ivory sheet of stationery, but it was blank. She laughed. It could have been a card from an old woman to a member of her quilting circle. Doreen tried to decide whether to write back. A thank you note for his thank you note? But before she could make up her mind, another letter came. Dear Doreen, I have been thinking that maybe I could tell you a little more about myself this way, since you could probably tell that I am reserved and find it hard to do so in person. I am 19. In the fall, I will start the mathematics program at Ohio State University. I hope you won't think it is conceited of me to share that I received a full scholarship after winning a contest to solve a number theory problem regarding integers. If you are interested, the problem was to find all integers n such that there is more than one 3-digit integer capital N that is divisible by n, and capital N divided by n is equal to the sum of the squares of the digits of capital N. The answer is 6, 7, 11, and 14. I guess I am good at solving problems. Anyway, I am grateful for that chance, as my father is an elevator operator in the Loop, and though he works long hours, he could not have seen to the tuition himself. I have a new problem now, though. I can't stop thinking about this girl named Doreen. God, what a thrill it was to see her own name written in his handwriting. She remembered how he had adjusted his glasses with his left hand. Did he write with his left hand, too? Why did wondering about that take the breath from her lungs? Now she knew she was supposed to write him back. Maybe it was the privacy of this mode of communication, the way it seemed to unfold in a world of its own. But Doreen felt bold. I can't stop thinking about you either, she wrote. And what it would be like to kiss you. She couldn't believe herself, but she mailed it, and a response came flying back. Soon, Moselle and Doreen were off and running, and the narration progressed from the finer qualities of each other's eyes to earlobes, collarbones, and points south. Moselle was always respectful, Doreen a little more daring, and the temperature of the letters increased across the month of July and into August right alongside the popping thermometer. The final letter from Doreen to Moselle was rousing enough to send a plume of smoke from his mailbox, she predicted with glee. She asked him to meet her on Wooded Island in Jackson Park on Saturday evening, in the dune grass off one of the trails. You didn't have to be a future math major at Ohio State to figure out what that meant. The way Doreen saw it, if she was going to go on the road with her singing group, if she was going to live the life of a star, recording these songs about love and affection, she needed some experience. The world being what it was, she knew Moselle could not take her out on a real date. But Doreen didn't really care. She'd been on dates with boys from the neighborhood, and they seemed like tiresome children in her memory now that she compared them with Moselle. Moselle was a man. He was serious and smart, and the way he described her own lips to her made her want to scream. Saturdays, Doreen worked the day shift at Art's Grill, 6 blocks from home on Taylor and Aberdeen. Business had been slow, but everyone said Art just had to hold on until they finished the new university campus. Then students would come flooding in for burgers and scrambled eggs, and it would be just like the good old days, when there were still lots of Italians and the Eisenhower Expressway had not yet taken an axe to the neighborhood. Doreen did not really have the temperament to be a waitress on any day. She was impatient and incapable of fawning. But today, knowing what the evening might hold, she was worse than usual. She fumed and stared daggers at the lingerers, who took 1 bite of tuna sandwich for every 2 columns they read in the Sun-Times. She watched the clock as if it were a sacred oracle. Art, Doreen and the other waitresses called him Mr. Messina, took note of her fidgeting with the stainless steel creamer pitchers lined up behind the counter, turning all their handles just so. "You all right, Bella?" Mr. Messina asked as he cleared 2 plates from the lunch counter left behind by a mother and her picky son. The kid's grilled cheese was almost untouched. "Oh, fine," Doreen said, and pulled her pencil from her hair as a new customer jangled through the door. She smiled at her boss. Mr. Messina was only 30 or so. He had taken over the diner from his father, who was also named Arturo. They hadn't even needed to change the sign. Arturo the Younger had married an elegant woman from St. Louis, and Carla had heard through the grapevine that she was barren. Doreen felt sad for them. Such a shame not to be able to have a family, she thought. And then immediately she recognized this as something Carla would say. The afternoon crawled on. Finally, Doreen found herself sitting on the park bench nearest the meeting place they'd agreed on. It had been a gray day, with rain falling off and on, and so the park never got very crowded. Now, with the sun already behind the skyline, only a few people passed on the walking path. Some carried fishing gear for the lagoon. One man had a new canonet hanging around his neck and headed toward what was left of the Japanese garden after vandals had destroyed it and the city refused to pay for its repair. Beyond the lagoon was the golf course green, and farther south, the beach. Doreen had not even thought about suggesting they go there, and not just because the activities she had in mind would require the privacy of tall grass and trees. Just last week, a girl named Velma Murphy had led a group of Negro kids in an effort to integrate Rainbow Beach, about 10 blocks south, while white boys threw rocks at them, and one split Velma's head open. Little Rock by the shore was no place for Doreen and Moselle to go together. Just as she was starting to worry that he might not show, and who could blame him, Moselle came strolling up the path, carrying a blanket and a picnic basket. She wondered whether this was something he had seen in a movie, because she couldn't imagine any boy she knew thinking to pack a picnic. He wore a straw hat and sunglasses, and Doreen waved when she saw him. "Hi," she said. When she tried to say more, her mouth got tangled up and she bit her tongue. It only made things worse when she remembered that this was the very same mouth he had described so beautifully to her in his letters. Suddenly, it wasn't working. Her courage was failing her. For his part, Moselle seemed calm. But shy people had more practice hiding their nerves, Doreen thought. "Hi," he said. They sat together on the bench, the basket at their feet, and Moselle pulled out 2 bottles of orange soda and the sandwiches he had made for them. They were slapdash, with 2 thick slices of ham he had sawed off the bone, but Doreen was charmed that he had gone to so much trouble. As they ate in silence, Doreen wondered if Moselle was also replaying the bold words from their letters, the things they had declared and asked for. An old man walked by with a schnauzer, and it occurred to Doreen that he might give them, Moselle, that is, a hard time, but the man only said good evening to them and kept on going. The dark branches of the trees stood out against the slate-colored sky. Moselle had his hand on one side of the basket's handle, and Doreen put her hand on the other side and swung it back and forth. He grinned and looked over at her. "I thought you said you were going to kiss me," she said. "You even told me how." And then, because she could see he was going to wait for her, he had to be sure he didn't suggest anything she wasn't okay with doing. She stood up and looped the basket's handle over her elbow and motioned for him to follow her into the thigh-high grass and tall trees between the path and the lagoon. They weren't completely hidden. If either of them had been thinking straight, they would have realized that one person seeing them in there together could set off a chain of events that would end with Moselle in jail or worse. But it was impossible to feel afraid with so much thrill coursing through their veins. Their own words called them into the grass like a siren's song. Doreen had written to Moselle that thinking about his shoulders made her weak in the knees. They really were very nice shoulders, if a little skinny now that she was seeing them again in real life. Moselle had written to Doreen that he wanted to start his fingertips at her chin and send them trailing down. Had they been bluffing, protected by the safety of the paper and pen? Now here they were, daring themselves to follow through. Lying in the grass, they kissed and let their hungry tongues slide together, half the blanket under them and the other half pulled over top of them like a sleeping bag. Doreen wanted to leap all the way inside Moselle's mouth, and she felt she might die if she couldn't get her bare skin up against his. Every muscle in Moselle's body seemed to be flexed, but he exercised complete control and waited for Doreen to initiate each move. She grabbed the back of his hand and moved his fingertips to the hem of her sundress, urging him to slide it up, up, up. When he touched the edge of her underpants, she felt his hot groan into her hair as she fumbled with his buckle. Panting, he stopped her hand. "Are you sure?" he asked. Doreen nodded, but still he held her hand. A dragonfly landed on his shoulder, and she watched its gossamer wings pulse, glint in the fading light. It flew off. "I'd really feel better if you said the words," Moselle said, the exquisite patience in his voice at odds with his hungry eyes. "I just want to make sure it's what you really want." "Yes, please, Moselle," Doreen said. "Please don't make me wait any longer." He pressed his mouth against hers again, and then reached into his pocket for a little packet. "It's a Trojan. I got it from my cousin." Doreen had heard about these from Wanda, but she had no idea where a person could go to buy one. Again, she felt impressed by Moselle's foresight and conscientiousness. He tried to rip open the packet, but it slipped from his hand into the folds of the blanket. When he reached down to get it, he kissed her bare stomach, and they smiled at each other in the dim light as she slid her underpants off one leg and left them hooked around the ankle of the other. His second attempt to tear the foil was more successful, and he lifted up onto his knees, though not too high, still careful to keep his head down below the line of the grass, and got himself ready. Doreen could barely breathe as she watched him. She pulled him down and slid her fingertips up the back of his shirt. The sky above them was violet, and suddenly filled with dozens of dragonflies, vibrating and darting in their strange patterns. She watched them as she felt, for the first time, the shock of what it was to be entered, as she fell into the pure enjoyment of his body and hers, so sleek and lovely in the evening light. Now, a pair of the dragonflies landed on Moselle's shoulder, locked in their own strange embrace, and Doreen felt certain that a kind of magic was all around Moselle and her, a spell of protection on the dune grass. When it was over, he kissed her, salty sweat on his upper lip, and told her she was so pretty it hurt to look at her, and she thought that this was everything she had hoped for. More than that. She counted in her mind that there were enough days left before Moselle moved to Ohio to do it 13 more times. 2. Margie. Margie kept her secret for as long as she could. In the beginning, this involved merely a tidy compartmentalization, the alarming fact sealed away alongside other alarming facts in her brain's deep storage, like the time she saw her grandfather's penis when his robe splayed as he was getting out of bed, the terrier in the middle of Northwest Highway, flattened but still breathing, that she did not even try to help. There was a safe place for shame, and it was under lock and key. But the truth will out, as Father Keene liked to say, menacingly, and in Margie's case, it was making its debut along the waistband of her flannel school uniform skirt. When it would no longer zip, she considered using some of the money she'd made over the summer as a nanny for the Grebe family to buy a new uniform. Mr. Grebe owned Grebe Jewelers, the nicest store in Sycamore Ridge, and the family had paid Margie well for taking Susan and Richard to the country club pool every day. But the skirt would have to be ordered from the school store, and she didn't think she could do it without her mother, Verna, finding out. Instead, Margie bridged the gap, first with a small gold safety pin, and next with an old diaper pin she found among the clothespins on a shelf above the washing machine. When she was forced to make one last pathetic attempt with a kilt pin, the bottom 2 buttons on her blouse straining like faulty bolts in a dam, She realized she was going to have to tell Verna the truth. The next day was Saturday, a gray October morning. Verna was in the yard of their red brick bungalow, wrapping burlap around her rose bushes. Margie stood quietly behind her, her hands clenched in fists inside the pockets of her wool coat, as Verna's expert fingers tied the twine on the final bush. When she stepped back to admire her work, she fished a cigarette from the pocket of the cable-knit cardigan she wore over her apron. "Lord, Margie," she said, as she nearly stepped on her youngest child. "Don't sneak up on people." "I'm sorry, Mother." Margie realized she was just going to have to say it. There was no way to bring the conversation around naturally to the topic of mortal sin. "Did you salt the roast like I asked you?" Margie winced. Verna shook her head and took a slow drag on the Chesterfield. She had long arms and fingers and a narrow face pinged with exhaustion. She had raised 4 other children and seemed determined to get this one launched into the world so she could lie down and die. Had she always been this way? Margie sometimes wondered whether Verna had a glamorous past, back in the years before the war. She might have styled her coppery hair in big, soft curls and worn a fitted green dress. She might have danced to big band music in a dance hall. But Margie didn't dare ask Verna about those days, if they'd ever existed. With Verna, the only hope of temporary alliance involved anticipating what she might complain about next and impressing her by doing it first. In this case, however, Verna's scorn would only be directed at Margie herself. "What is the matter with you?" Verna asked. Margie took a breath. "I've got something to tell you. But Verna saved her from having to say the words. Verna was no dummy. With the cigarette still in her fingers, she wrenched open Margie's coat and pressed her palm to the low part of her belly. Touch was rare in the Ahern family, so it was a strangely intimate experience. It might have been a comfort. Someone was finally acknowledging Margie's miraculous bulge with a warm, soft hand. If the reprimand weren't so swift. "You little idiot," Verna said. She struck Margie hard across the face with her open palm. Then she put her head in her hands and shook it, ash cascading down the backs of her fingers. "I knew you looked heavy." When she opened her eyes, she glanced over the fence into the Cunninghams' yard, then in the other direction to the Jensens'. Overhead, a plane passed on its way to Midway. Its belly, too, looked round and full. Margie wished it would fall out of the sky and plow her into the ground. Verna yanked Margie's coat closed. "Get inside." They stood in the kitchen in silence. Margie felt a strange mix of dread and wonder. Of course, things were only going to get worse from here, but she was genuinely surprised that her mother had believed her right away. Before today, Verna had reacted with skepticism to every last thing Margie had ever told her. When Margie had an obvious fever, Verna would swipe a hand across her daughter's forehead and pronounce her fine. When Verna had discovered Margie crying on the floor of her bedroom closet in her homecoming dress, afraid to go to the gym because what if nobody wanted to dance with her? Verna stared at her hard and said, "Stop making up problems just so you can deliver a tearful monologue." After 4 other children, nothing that happened to Margie would ever be impressive or delightful or tragic. The only reaction she would ever get from Verna would be irritation. "We're going to have to get your father to come home from work," Verna said. Frank Ahern was an insurance salesman in a dreary office just a few blocks away from home. Verna lit another cigarette and called him from the wall-mounted phone next to the pantry. Because Margie couldn't bear to listen to that conversation, she wandered out of the kitchen, through the dining room, and into the pale peach front room. She pressed her stockinged feet into the rug. There were 2 elegant sofas facing each other, a brick fireplace with gleaming brass tools her parents never actually used, A bookshelf full of old readers.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?